Hi, I'm biological anthropologist Jonathan Marks, and I'm here to explain why you are not an ape. To see why that is, we first have to ask, why would anyone think they are an ape? After all, apes are hairy, live in trees, and fling their poo. Hopefully you don't. If you do, then you are an ape, and you probably won't understand the rest of this video. So, are you an ape? First, what do we mean by ape? The term traditionally refers to a group of primates that share specializations of the skeleton and musculature, which allows them to move through the trees differently than monkeys do. Stereotypically, at least, monkeys jump around from branch to branch, while apes swing from branch to branch. This form of locomotion is called brachiation. The human upper body is still fairly good at this, although our lower body has been secondarily tweaked for terrestrial bipedalism. There are only a few species that have the anatomical ability to play the guitar like Pete Townsend. It's going to take a short, stiff spinal column, a rotating shoulder, and strongly flexed fingers. And the only other animals that have the anatomical capacity of doing this we call apes. And it's fundamentally related to how they move, except that we evolved to move a bit differently. And that produces the paradox that our bodies carry the adaptations for arboreal brachiation like the apes, but we don't use them because we're walking on the ground. So the taxonomic group that we use to classify these animals is the superfamily Hominoidea, which traditionally encompasses apes and humans. From left to right, the gibbons or small-bodied apes, and the great apes, orangutan, gorilla, and chimpanzee. These are the pretty uncontroversial phylogenetic relationships of these species, derived from the overall biology of these species, with chimps, gorillas, and humans being very closely related, and chimps and humans appearing to be especially similar genetically. And we will leave the complexities of hominoid speciation, backcrossing, and incomplete lineage sorting for another day. To say that we are apes, then, is to redefine the word ape from an anatomical and ecological contrast category against human to something else, a descent group. In other words, we are apes is not a statement about our biological natures. It's just a redefinition of the word ape to include us into it. Why? What does calling us apes bring to the table? Number one, it privileges genetic relationships over all other kinds of relationships and dazzles you with science. After all, we are over 98% identical by a DNA base-for-base comparison with a chimpanzee. Now, that may impress you if you don't know anything about DNA. Obviously, it means we are genetically very similar to chimpanzees, regardless of any slop around the number 98. But does it mean that we are 98% chimpanzees? The short answer is that percentage of DNA match is not a transcendent scale of relationship. It obviously tells us that we are very closely related to chimpanzees. But there are only 4 bases in DNA, so an alignment of your DNA with that of a daffodil is going to randomly match in 1 out of every 4 places. But you aren't 1/4 daffodil, no matter what your DNA says. The fact that your DNA matches ape DNA very closely tells you that we are indeed closely related to the apes, but not that we are 98% apes any more than it tells us that we are 25% daffodils. And of course, we also share a remote common ancestry with them, but that's a video for another day. The second thing that calling us apes does is that it privileges genetic relationships over anatomical and ecological relationships. If you care to do that, here's what you're getting into. The paleontologist George Gaylord Simpson explained over half a century ago that although orangutans diverged early genetically from humans and chimps, humans radically diverged ecologically in just a few million years from both of them. So, if you were asked which two of these three are most similar, the answer would be genetically human and chimp, ecologically chimp and orangutan. You could say then that we are apes because genetically we fall within the ape cluster, and decide that that outweighs our ecological divergence from the ape cluster. Our ecological distinction, which has us driving the other apes to extinction, would be irrelevant in the face of our genetic similarity. You can certainly say that, although I'm not sure why you would want to, unless you're a geneticist who wants to make sure that ecologists get no funding. So maybe you have second thoughts about the transcendence of genetic data over all other data and relationships. So number 3, our phylogenetic descent places us among the apes, and therefore we are apes. There is our cladogram, and since chimps are more closely related to us than to orangutans, therefore we are apes. True, but nobody said that apes is a descent group. It's an anatomical group, and the problem with this argument becomes clear once we pan out from the apes and look at the monkeys. And what we will find is that the rhesus monkey of Asia is more closely related to us than it is to the capuchin monkey of Central America. That is, of course, because monkey is an anatomical term and not a phylogenetic term. If it were a phylogenetic term, then we would be both apes and monkeys, which would be kind of absurd. But wait, there's more. Because the tarsier is more closely related to us than to the ring-tailed lemur, either prosimians is an anatomical, ecological, and not a phylogenetic term, or else we are apes, monkeys, and prosimians simultaneously. That's why it's important to understand the meaning of words. Because the coelacanth is more closely related to us than it is to a trout. And yet the coelacanth is a scaly, water-dwelling, stinky vertebrate. It's a fish. And either fish is not a phylogenetic term, or else we are simultaneously apes, monkeys, prosimians, and fish, which kind of undermines the whole reason for classifying, doesn't it? But of course, that's exactly the point. These are not categories describing descent groups, and never were. These categories are paraphyletic, not phylogenetic, although some biologists do get a charge out of explaining that you are a fish. Now, there is an important point here, that descent groups do not map perfectly onto anatomical categories. In other words, we evolved from apes. We are ex-apes. We evolved more remotely from monkeys. We are ex-monkeys. We evolved from prosimians. We are ex-prosimians. And we evolved from fish. So we are ex-fish. The point is that that is what our ancestors were, which is different from what we are, which is what we mean by evolution. If our ancestors were apes or fish, and we are still apes or fish, that's kind of the opposite of evolution, isn't it? And that brings us to the fourth thing that calling us apes does, in addition to privileging genetic data and phylogenetic relationships and burying the ecological and anatomical relationships. Namely, boy, that sure scores a point against the creationists, doesn't it? Not only are we related to apes, but we are apes. So there. But we can't really let the creationists dictate what we say as scientists. And besides which, I'd be interested to meet a single creationist who ever said, "Gee whiz, I'm an ape? I guess evolution must be right after all." There are better arguments to get into with creationists. And so, back to the apes. Are we apes? Sure, you can say apes no longer means an anatomical contrast group against humans, but now means a descent group that includes humans, equivalent to hominoidea. And so hominoidea now means not apes and humans, but apes including humans. And that is entirely legitimate. It's just not a biological revelation. It's a word game. But we are apes because I have now defined apes in such a way as to include us should not persuade anybody of anything. The biological legitimacy of that statement is only conferred by assuming, first, that genetic relationships are more important than anatomical relationships, and second, that phylogenetic descent is more important than ecological divergence. Those are both defensible positions, although you might start thinking about whether they're actually worth the effort of defending.